Hello, my name is Rick Casale, and I'm a trustee of Carbon Copy and your host for this online event. Welcome to my guests, and welcome to you, our audience. This event is all about inspiration and action, and what kind of collective local action we can take to address the immediate environment and climate crisis. This week, we're going to focus on circular economies and the role of not only individuals, but also communities in this transformation. A few quick housekeeping details before we get started. The event is being recorded, and we'll make a link available to the event afterwards. Microphones and cameras are turned off, except for our guest speakers. There's a chat and a Q&A and a poll that you can see on the right-hand side of your screen. Chat is for audience members, just to chat amongst themselves. Q&A is if you would like to ask any of our panelists a question. And please, if you can start typing those as soon as you can, it'll give me more time to collate them. And we'll have a Q&A session at the end. And there is a poll in the background for any of the audience to have a look at it and take that poll in your own time. That would be great. At the end, as I say, we'll have a short Q&A section before I wrap up. So let's get started. And I would like to introduce you to our guest speakers. Lucy Siegle is a writer and a broadcaster on nature and the environment. She writes for The Observer and is the author of several books about greener and more ethical living, including A Good Life, Green Living in an Urban Jungle, and Turning the Tide on Plastic. She is the chair of the Real Circularity Coalition, an organization that advocates for true circularity and truly circular materials and processes. Welcome, Lucy. Joanna Dainton is the reuse coordinator at Bristol Waste. She's responsible for setting up and running Bristol's first reuse shop at a household recycling centre. Her previous roles include working in community engagement at Bristol Waste on behaviour change around waste and recycling, and in Glasgow on Zero Waste Scotland initiatives. Welcome, Jo. And Rebecca Burgess is CEO at CityC. She heads up a not-for-profit organisation campaigning to stop plastic pollution at source. Prior to CityC, she worked with a variety of companies and not-for-profits in shaping leading community-serving programmes, including Eunomia, where she worked with the European Commission on its Single-Use Plastics Directive. Welcome, Rebecca. So I think I'm tempted, Rebecca. Are you okay to start first?
Yeah, definitely.
So if I can, just by way of background, as I've just introduced you and CityC, who it would be good for you just to give us a bit of background on your organisation. And I know that you are focused very much on individual action campaigns, but also on involving businesses, helping to reduce and to reuse. And one of the things I'm really excited to hear about from your perspective is how you can go about building kind of an ecosystem or the infrastructure that you really need to get all this individual behavior change to scale. And I know there's one or two campaigns that you've been at the forefront of. So if you wouldn't mind, please, the floor is yours.
Great. So hello, everyone. It's really fantastic to be on this webinar today, talking to you all. I'll keep the introduction to CityC quite brief, because I know that time is quite limited. But just to kick us off, if we can go to the next slide. CityC is a not-for-profit organisation solely focused at the moment around stopping plastic pollution at source. We were set up by our founder and environmentalist and author, Natalie Fee, and we very much focus on tackling single-use plastic items most commonly found on beaches, and that's sort of our niche area. So next slide. And simply put, our mission is very much to prevent plastic pollution at source. And how we do that, if we go into the next slide, we do it in a number of different ways. Oh, back one. So we campaign, as Rick mentioned, we run a number of different campaigns, which we'll talk about in a bit. We collaborate, and that's very much part of the narrative that I'm keen to discuss today, is who we collaborate with and why we choose to collaborate. We innovate, so a lot of our programs are very innovative and new and very solutions focused. Hopefully we inspire not just our supporters and volunteers, but communities, our partners, and a whole host more. And as Rick mentioned, we are very much focused on the individual. So we run campaigns to empower the individuals to make a difference, and we want to make sure that that difference is shown through our actions. So we act, we do a whole host of things, including petitions. Next slide, please. And that very much has led to some awesome statistics. So we can say that through our campaigning work, we've prevented over 132 million pieces of plastic saved across our campaigns, which is all fantastic. If we go on to the next slide, so what are our campaigns? Next slide. So some of these are just our 2020 campaigns. We run a whole host of other campaigns that we have done for a number of years, but we very much focus on refill, which I'll talk a little bit more in detail. Since COVID-19, we have done an increasing amount of work on reusables and making sure that they stay on the agenda and on the menu at a lot of food to go outlets. We've launched a plastic-free living hub on our website, which is full of really cool tips for everyone. We also launched the PPE video over the last month, so I definitely recommend you check that out. And two other projects are around period products. So Rethink Periods is an educational program, and Plastic Free Periods is a campaign that we run to just spread the word that there's an alternative to all of those single-use plastic period products out there. So the focus for today, I'd like to talk you through, just before that, is really focusing in on our audience. So yeah, next slide. So businesses and councils, as Rick mentioned, brands and retailers and individuals. And it's through focusing on all of these three which makes our campaigns so successful. It's just focusing in on one doesn't lead to sort of the outcomes that we need in that global change. So if we go next slide, Refill. Hopefully most of you will have heard about Refill. It's a drinking water campaign that connects people who are out and about with thousands of taps found in businesses that are happy to give tap water for free and refill your reusable bottle. And since we launched back in 2015, there's been over 300,000 Refill app downloads, 400 community refill schemes, and over 30,000 refill stations. So those are the businesses that are giving away the free tap water. And I just wanted to say that that is the infrastructure that makes Refill successful. It's having a tech platform that is sort of as a way to coordinate the data and the change that's going across the UK, but globally. It's the community, individuals on the ground signing up refill stations and really spreading the refill message. And then it's also the businesses that are getting behind the campaign and providing the solution. And as such, Refill has prevented over 100 million plastic bottles to date, and is now a global campaign. So we've launched in 8 different countries worldwide. And hopefully most of you will have engaged in our National Refill Day campaign last year, which reached over 77 million people. So it's through that marketing and making it mainstream also that has meant that it's been a massive success in both media and a lot of other places, with 8 out of 10 people saying that the refill campaign makes them more likely to carry a reusable bottle and refill on the go, which is absolutely fantastic. Next slide, please. Part of the infrastructure, and sort of one of the reasons why Refill is as successful as it is because it plays to a whole host of different interests. So some stakeholders might be most keen on saving money. Others are obviously more conscious about protecting the environment or stopping plastic pollution. There's the climate change element as well, and also preventing waste. So whether we're talking to businesses, individuals, councils, and many more, or it's about really targeting that message that suits their existing plans and what they're motivated by. And that, I think, is one of the large successes of Refill to date. Next slide, please. And these are just some of our big stats from last year. I won't go through them all, as I think I've covered most of them, but it's just to show just the breadth of the campaign to date. Next slide. And it's really exciting time for us because Refill is being extended to not just cover drinking water, but also the go-to place to find your reusable coffee cup refill, your lunch boxes, and your zero waste shop. So this autumn, we'll be able to share that functionality via the Refill app with all of you. Next slide. And that's what it will look like. So it was tested and piloted in Bristol and Oxford at the end of last year, really successfully, and we're really excited about the next stage of Refill. Next slide, please. Finally, I just wanted to touch upon sort of the support that we get from councils in implementing more innovative educational programs, and Rethink Periods is one of those. So it's a national program that we got funding from Waitrose, and it's delivered amazing results in the last year alone, with over 700 teachers and nurses now trained to provide unbiased period education to primary and secondary school children. It's reached over 100,000 students and distributed over 600 product boxes. And a good example of sort of localising this to councils is Bristol City Council has given us specific funding to roll out this programme to schools in the Bristol area. So we're working more and more with councils in delivering campaigns in their regional locations. So that, I believe, is a little bit of about CityC and some of our campaigns.
Fantastic. I do have one question that I'd like to ask you before moving on to Jo. And this is just taking a step back from the audience. It's really a kind of the big picture, which is, do you have an opinion or a view on potentially when single-use plastic might actually be banned? Obviously, you're trying to work around, the assumption that it's with us, and obviously there's a bigger opportunity from a campaign point of view just to ban it in the UK. Do you have any opinion on when or how realistic something like that could be?
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing bans already around the world, which is really reassuring to know. And I think it's really important to be insight driven. So really thinking about what is the single-use plastic items most littered, most found in our environment and on our beaches around the world, and focus those bans on those. So fingers crossed, even though it was delayed due to coronavirus, even in the UK, we will soon see a straw and stirrer ban. Plastic bag bans are happening already. Germany and France are leading the way in some of their government initiatives. So I think it will be, it's happening. But a total ban of single-use plastics, I think, is unrealistic, and we need in a healthcare environment that flexibility to make sure that in hospitals there is always going to be a need for that. It's actually making sure that the individuals that are responsible for a lot of the littering and the environmental damage are being sort of conscious and therefore able to respond to those more targeted single-use bans.
Yeah, thank you very much. Jo, I'd like to come to you because, Rebecca was mentioning how she's been working with the council, and I'm really excited to hear from a council's perspective. Bristol Waste is wholly owned by Bristol City Council, and therefore your ethos is totally aligned with the council's in terms of trying to reduce the amount of waste, minimize that. And I'd love to hear from you on one of your most recent initiatives, which is this reuse shop that you have just opened. So please do tell us more.
Absolutely. Well, thanks so much, Rick, for inviting me here to talk. And yeah, it's great to hear from Rebecca about all the fantastic work that CityC are doing. I'd certainly say, in terms of the council perspective, yeah, Bristol Waste, as you mentioned, wholly owned by Bristol City Council, and certainly I feel from the work I'm doing, it does seem that there is a lot of momentum at council level and certainly at Bristol Waste level to kind of reduce waste and plastic waste as much as we can. And yeah, I suppose one of the main things we've been able to do is open our first ever reuse shop in Bristol. So that's at the Avonmouth Recycling Centre. And yeah, I'll tell you guys a bit about how we got here, because I think one of the things I'd like to share to anyone out there listening who's perhaps working for a council is that it all is possible, and it can make such a difference in terms of those items which are coming to recycling centres and are just too good to be thrown away. Finding a second home for them, and a reuse shop is a really good way to do that. So yeah, we started in 2018, really looking more at reuse, and initially it was the really simple wins. So that was bicycles and mobility aids, which were being brought to the recycling centres, and as you can imagine, are very easily reused, especially bicycles. They're made for repair. So we started collecting these and diverting them from the recycling stream, and basically just donating them to local charities and bike enterprises in Bristol who could do fantastic work with them. So that's kind of how it all began. And we had really good feedback from the on-site teams and from the public around what we were doing. So this kind of emboldened us to do more. And the kind of next stage was looking at kind of wooden furniture and yeah, a lot of the household items that were coming in into the waste stream, to see if we could do something with those as well. So we started with a pop-up event in June 2018, and that was a really good way to kind of test the water and see what's possible, like what the appetite was in Bristol. And over the next for 18 months, we held 3 more events, expanding what we were selling to electricals, children's toys, bric-a-brac, tools, paint, all manner of things. And obviously there are challenges with all these things. Electronics need to be pat tested and function tested. But we found we were able to do that. I was actually trained to do pat testing, so I'm an official pat tester for Bristol Waste, and it means we can do it in-house, which is cheaper and also more convenient than kind of getting somebody in to do it. So this all kind of culminated in, if Heather could put the first slide up, that'd be great. Culminated in our opening an actual reuse shop, which is open kind of 5 days a week. And that happened on the 23rd of June this year. So 2 years exactly, the day. And this is kind of what it looks like. So you can see on the slide, there's a few different pictures. So the picture with the kind of blue sky above it kind of shows how the doors to the reuse shop are actually underneath the recycling centre itself. So we really are kind of at the heart of everything that's going on at the Avonmouth Recycling Centre. And this is a fantastic design because it enables us to be right there when people are dropping things off, either intentionally bringing them to us, or if they kind of weren't aware that we were at the site, then we'd be able to intercept them, you know, before they throw a TV in the TV bin. We might say to them, oh, excuse me, that TV looks great, perhaps we can have it for our reuse shop. And if they're happy for that, then we take it from them and make sure it's reused. So yeah, we're open 5 days a week at the moment, and we're just coming into our 4th week today. So that's a really exciting time for us. And so far, it seems to have gone really well. We've got an amazing bunch of volunteers who are already helping us, which is fantastic. And myself and my apprentice Callum are kind of running the show. So we're open, I think I said, between 10 and 3 weekdays, and hopefully we're going to expand this to weekends as well. I think I'd just like to touch on a couple of things that make us maybe a little bit different from other reuse shops or even charity shops that people might have visited. So if I could have the next slide, please. One of the things that we sell in the shop is that I think is a fantastic example of the circular economy, is something called Recolor, and this is remanufactured paint. So it's paint that is surplus waste paint collected at recycling centres across the UK. And Recolor are able to remanufacture this in the Wirral and I believe in Oxford somewhere. Have an incredible machine, paint goes in and they can dye it so it's an exact colour, and they can do it kind of in large quantities. So we're really excited to offer that to customers coming to the shop, because not only is it quite cheap, but it's obviously an incredible fully recycled product, and paint waste is something that we really see a lot of, and it's very hard to do very much with. So yeah, Recolor is super cool. And the next slide shows the other thing that I just wanted to mention, and that is we're actually selling compost, and this compost is made from Bristol's garden waste, so the garden waste collected at recycling centres. And is made by a farmer just a few miles down the road, so really locally. And we're able to pick it up loose in a massive skip, basically, and then decant it into these little ones you see in the picture. So it's packaging free, which I'm sure Rebecca and CityC will be happy about. And it's peat free, which is really good. It's pretty cheap, given that it's all of those things, and it is made so locally to Bristol. So those are some of the products that we're just really excited to be able to sell. And then finally, my final slide really was just talking a little bit about the different models. So perhaps there are people from local authorities or even charities out there who are thinking, well, this is a great idea. How could I make it happen? And I just wanted to recap. These are some of the models that I've seen. Obviously, there are probably many more as well. But these are some of the ones I've seen while I've been researching the reuse shop here in Bristol. So, for example, you could have a situation where a charity actually runs the reuse shop on behalf of the City Council. So a good example of that would be Age UK in Warwick. So they are kind of in control of the reuse shop. They run it on a day-to-day basis, and that actually makes it quite risk-free in some ways for the local authority, that they haven't got the pressure of running it themselves. And often charities kind of come with their own customer base and volunteer base already set up, because people know about them already. So people will shop there because they know about Age UK type thing. The next one is kind of what we've done. So as I mentioned, Bristol Waste is owned by Bristol City Council. So essentially it is the local council setting up their own reuse shop on their own recycling centre, which is very good because we have a very close relationship with everybody who works on site. So all the on-site teams you see, they're basically the same team as me. We're all singing from the same hymn sheet, so that's really good. And kind of the third option, which I know a bit less about, but is certainly out there, is where local authorities use a private waste contractor, for example, Suez, and kind of as part of the contract, that Suez or whoever would provide a reuse shop alongside all the other things they do for the council, so collecting domestic waste, etc. And all I would say with that model is it's something that if councils are coming up to the end of a contract and are thinking, we're going to put this out to tender, they could always, I know it's more work for this, but they can kind of add in, well, we want a reuse shop as well. And the people who want the tender would have to put forward ideas around how that could be done. But yeah, it just really is incredible, the amount of things that we find and that come in that are perfectly usable and could find a very good home with somebody else. It's just a matter of linking the two things together, the people who want the items and the items who need a home. So yeah, that's all from me.
Joe, just to clarify, because I think this is a fantastic initiative, you make a surplus, is that correct? This isn't a cost centre from a council's perspective.
No, absolutely. We are, I mean, it's only a month in, but we are planning to be able to make hopefully a surplus, but also we've committed a third of the profit we make to a local charity. So as Bristol Waste employees, we all get a vote, and at the moment it's still St Peter's Hospice, and that'll change on a yearly basis. So yeah, the third of the money will go to a charity, but then we are hoping we will make a surplus which will go back to the City Council to help with all the other things they need to fund just now. Obviously, there's a lot going on for local authorities, and really it is much more cost effective to reuse items than to landfill them, where there's a huge cost, or even recycle them, where the amount you get per tonne for recycled items could be a lot less than what you could sell just one item for.
That's fantastic. And one question I'd just like to ask from the audience, just while I still have you, is there was a question around textiles. So I think the paint recycling is a phenomenally good example of the circular economy. There's so much paint that just goes to household recycling centres. Textiles is another big potential area. Is it something that you are looking at? Is there a similar opportunity as there is to paint?
I'm not aware of anything quite on the scale of Recolor for textiles. I know there is some RAP funding around at the moment looking at textile recycling kind of on a fibre level. I think probably the biggest we'll ever go is having textiles in their kind of original form, so like a coat still as a coat being sold in the shop. I think from my understanding there is quite a lot of processing to do with all the fabric that isn't, in its original format, but is still clearly usable in some way. So I think probably getting to that extent might never be something we do, but certainly collecting textiles on site and making sure they are recycled by somebody else is something we do. So yeah.
That's great. No, thank you very much. Lucy, if I could turn to you. I think we've had a couple of really good examples and very different perspectives in terms of campaigns, both from a not-profit point of view and then also from a council. I think it'd be good to get yet another perspective in terms of some of the individual campaigns that you've been involved in, and not least what you're working on right now with the Real Circularity Coalition. To get a more collaborative approach to taking action. So over to you.
Well, I'm sorry to mess with your order, and I hope you can hear me because I keep getting all sorts of weird messages across the top of my screen.
We can hear you. Okay,
alert me if anything goes wrong. We have we've got some problem with Wi-Fi in this area today, apparently. I was actually going to attend this session just to listen because I was so interested in the community piece of this jigsaw, because I do see it as a jigsaw. But I have been asked to say a few words. So I'm primarily speaking, as you said, Rick, from my I'm chair of the Real Circularity Coalition. So it's a coalition of NGOs, different partnerships, some businesses who've got very ambitious goals on real circular economy. So we're talking about actual circularity rather than a lot of what we see at the moment is semi-circularity, especially from brands. And retailers, or pseudo-circularity. I've seen some academics refer to it as pseudo-circularity. And in the brand and retail space, you'll often see that there are goals announced. We're going to be fully recyclable, or we're going to be 100% recycled by XYZ. And it's very hard to monitor those brands on that journey. And you were asking about textiles just now. You're talking about textiles. And that's a really interesting one because, of course, we are predominantly increasingly wearing blended fibers, blended with plastics, with synthetics. And once you blend a fiber, it's very, very difficult to separate and non-desirable to separate. And really, what does that do on a community level, on a local level? It suggests that you're going to need chemical recycling plants in every community to be able to deal with this kind of surfeit of fashion waste, because we know there is a huge amount of it. So one of the things that we are doing is tracking the solutions and the goals that are being offered and being signaled as being circular solutions. And we're really just trying to work out, if they work, if there's merit in what they're saying. I think ultimately we're working as a coalition. We are building a consensus, and there's two things that we want to do. We want to create appetite and knowledge within the mainstream about what a real circular economy looks like. And this will have an advantage. It will help us to be able to meet our climate goals, because there's a very strong link between real circularity and emissions reduction. It will also help on resource reduction, all the things that we're interested in, and I suspect is why we're all here in the first place: nature and climate, and ethics as well. Social justice is obviously an important part of this piece. So we want to create a real appetite and a real understanding so that people can identify what's good and what's bad and what's real and what's not real. But we also really, what are we doing? We're saying we want the end of make, take and waste. We want the end of linear manufacturing, design where damage and harm to the environment is designed in. And that's really, you know, our bigger kind of umbrella thing that we want the end to. And of course, in our daily lives, we send, you know, hundreds and thousands of messages every day to brands and retailers and services, companies that create linear products and services. We send them a thumbs up with everything we buy, because really what that system recognizes is profit and volume sales. So every time we consume, we're sending a thing going, hey, we're really happy with this. You're doing a great job, because it's not a nuanced service. So somehow we need an intervention that is going to disrupt that properly. And we need it at a cultural level, as well as a policy level, as well as a community level. So the coalition is just putting together all of those different pieces. And for me personally, having worked in many different areas, but anybody who knows my my writing, I am obsessed by fashion and plastics, and the two have really come together in recent years, so that, you know, a lot of the time when people think they're wearing fashion, they're actually wearing plastic. So in terms of my other experience that you referenced, for me, it's becoming blended in the way that I hate fibers, but it's all becoming part of the same mission, if you see what I mean. But I do think we're at a crossroads, and I do think it's very, very interesting, especially on a policy level, because I think it's got rather a dry title, but the European Union's revised Waste Framework Directive, which was established in 2018, what that will do is through various different avenues, and the Circularity Directive will start to unpick the hoax of recycling. So at the moment, the recycling figures, as we probably all know, I know somebody's worked for Eunomia here, you'll know that they are, how can I put this politely, they're not very watertight. So we have a real problem with yield losses, and a real problem with, you know, the technicalities of recycling, in that we are often, you know, adding into figures the fact that there was ketchup left in a bottle. So to put a long story short, recycling figures will change, they will plummet, and the general public will be, you know, hopping mad and say, what has been going on? But we should look at it as an opportunity. It's a bit like, do you remember when everyone started getting A star at GCSEs, and then you have to recalibrate the whole system? I think that's what the level that we're at. And we can go two ways. We can go real circular, or we can go back into loopholes, obfuscation, semi-circularity, pseudo-circularity. And obviously, we know which path we want to take. That's a clue. That's a spoiler. That's to success. Yeah. So anyway, I feel both invigorated, excited, and yeah, I think we've all got a lot of strong points to make, and now is the time to make them.
Lucy, there's a really nice question here that just builds on what you've been saying, because this notion of circularity and closing the circle, but there's also talk of this notion of slowing the circle down, you know, durability, more rental, more repair. So what's your point of view on, obviously they are interlinked, but slowing the throughput? Well, throughput's wrong because it's a closed circle, but slowing as opposed to closing.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, the semantics of it are interesting, but I think that anything that is respecting planetary boundaries and works how nature systems actually work is where we need to be. So I don't pursue the problem with thinking all the time about closing the circle, about circularity, is that people start to come up with a weird bunch of technical fixes which actually don't have the desired effect. So we shouldn't see the objective as getting something right the way round necessarily, because there's also, I can't remember who wrote this, but there was a rather brilliant paper recently where people talk about leaky loops and about how natural products degrade and fragment and, you know, fermentate, and all of these wonderful processes, which are also part or should be part of a circular economy where you use more natural, not just fibers, but natural materials. So yes, slowing the circle I would see as part of that as well. But what we don't want to do is slow the narrative of circularity, which goes back to what brands and retailers are often doing at the moment. Oh, my goal is here. I'm not going to change my material. I'm not going to change my volume. I'm actually going to do a sort of Neverland circular vision for the future. And I can't guarantee I'll get there, but, you know, I'm trying. So slowing the narrative is not where I'm at. But yeah, definitely slower processes. I'm all for that.
And let's segue into some Q&A, because I've got some great questions here. Before I let you go, Lucy, I just want to ask you one question straight off the bat. Building on your point about the brand message and, you know, what we are encouraged to do from a consumer's point of view, are we perhaps facing a crisis of convenience, so that we can't necessarily blame the brands and the companies for wrecking the environment, because they're simply supplying what we're demanding? You know, everybody wants quick and everybody wants cheap, and you know, and convenience is king. You know, how can we start to shift that mindset? Because that's really part of the root cause.
Well, as I said before, when we're sending a message to, I don't necessarily blame the brand or retailer. I blame them for, I blame the waste industry in conjunction with brands and retailers for setting up goals that are not going to get us to where we need to be, or don't have environmental integrity. I don't blame brands and retailers for not being responsive to consumer mores, because they are being very responsive to consumer mores, as you articulate. Yes, so we've created, you know, you can't really look at it in isolation anymore. We used to, you know, every discussion like this, we always used to have a question: is it whose fault is it, or who should be charged with leading the change? Is it consumers? Is it policymakers? Blah, blah, blah. We can't look at these things in siloed units anymore, because it is unfortunately political. And, you know, the politics of you know, our country seem to me that many people are on a slide to a low wage economy and low wage existence. And we know about the financial pressures that, you know, we've endured because of the COVID crisis. And then you may, you know, also add on Brexit and all of that kind of stuff. So consumers cannot be blamed for wanting cheap disposable items, because it's a symptom of panic, and we live in very panic-stricken times. It's also a symptom of a delusional attitude to nature and climate, which we all have to some degree, because we have not, you know, we haven't been given an alternative narrative that is possible for us. So there's work to be done absolutely everywhere. But one of the things that we have to look at, I think, especially if we're working in this area, is to look at not seeing members of the public as consumers, but as seeing them as citizens. And I very much now talk in terms of personal empowerment. As you know, I've done a lot of work around the fashion industry. I mean, if I was a sort of person that gives up early, you know, generally, I would have stopped banging on about it by now, because the evidence is that people really love fast fashion, you know, and I'm this tiny, tiny voice going, hey, that might be bad. So that can't be my metric. My metric has to be somewhere else. And one of the things where I have found breakthrough is talking to people about their own mental health and mindful shopping and not consuming more than they need, about relieving the pressure on them. Now, that's a slightly different subject, and sometimes I don't talk about nature or climate at all, but that seems to be a thing that people are responsive to. Sorry, that was a really long answer.
That's good. No, thank you very much.
Sorry.
Rebecca, I've got a question which I'll ask you, which is, in the very short term, I think because of the coronavirus crisis, we've had a bit of a backlash in terms of less willingness to share. moving to single use so that we're not touching items that someone else might have touched. How do you go about making reusable acceptable again?
Yeah, it has been sort of a big crisis, sort of that unlocked a lot of hysteria and panic and fear, and that's probably something that the government hasn't helped businesses know what to do. So their guidance on accepting reusables is non-existent, and therefore our role at CityC has been very much to build that guidance with industry experts. So we launched in the midst of COVID-19 our new contactless coffee campaign, which is a simple guide to how an individual, a citizen, can go into that coffee shop and still get a coffee in their reusable cup without any contact being made with the coffee shop owner or staff. And we've then subsequently done some additional guidance for water, given that Refill has over 30,000 businesses that pre-COVID were offering refills of the reusable bottle, and have since sort of come to us being in fear of what that actually means. Not to mention over 120 scientists have confirmed that reusables are absolutely fine as long as basic hygiene is used. So washing your hands, washing the reusable container, and that was a great piece of work by Greenpeace and Upstream. So we've got the evidence, we've got the facts. It's now just getting the message out to both individuals and businesses that there's no need to take a step back, that this is possible as long as we all do things responsibly, and we don't need the planet to pay. So that's just some of the work that we've been doing over the last month or two.
Great, thank you. Joe, question for you. Do you see this model of co-locating a reuse shop next to a household recycling centre as a good way to get more people to reuse more?
I think I do, in the sense that we do live in a world of kind of convenience and people feeling like they don't have enough time to do all the things in their day. So I think one of the great things about the reuse shop being at the recycling centre is we can capture all that stuff that people may well have meant to take to a charity shop or give to a friend or sell a Gumtree or whatever, but didn't get around to doing. So I think by locating here, we're kind of like, I think of us as a sort of last chance saloon, or like a sieve or something. Like we kind of are like the last barrier between landfill or recycling and kind of use. So I think it is important where we're located. And I think as well, for lots of people say this to me when they visit the recycling centre, they endlessly see things in big skips that look really great and they can't have, because once it's been thrown away, you're not allowed to take things back out and stuff. So I think by us being here, we obviously kind of stop that and give people like a bit of a solution. So yeah, there's less of the I want to get in that skip and get something out. There's more like, okay, you can't do that, but you could visit the shop downstairs where there's lots of reusable things that have been saved. It's kind of like giving a small positive at where a place that can be for some people a bit of a negative experience.
And building on that, another question: do you find or think that running this reuse shop is building better community relations between the council and the community?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's a real asset for the community. It does feel crazy to me that until we did this, Bristol didn't have one. Reuse shops aren't like a kind of thing of 2020 or anything. Some of them have been around, I think, for like 10 years in different councils in different areas of the UK. So it was important we have one, and I think, as a few people have mentioned in the chat, like Bristol does feel in some ways like a very kind of green-minded city. So for us to build a reuse shop for Bristol seemed like a very good idea. And yeah, I think not only are people getting to access reuse things that would have otherwise been thrown away, but we're very conscious that the price range is not about making it a very hip, vintage, fancy shop. It has loads of those qualities, I'd like to say. It has some great stuff in it, but it's actually meant to be really accessible. We're not trying to make a huge profit off of people. Most things are genuinely under 40 quid. And that's like electronics sometimes as well. So yeah, like I think it's important that we kind of make it open for everyone and accessible to all.
Great, thank you. Lucy, over to you. Fully circular systems require fundamental reworking of our consumption models. Fair enough. Do you think that innovation, the innovation that you've been talking about, is more likely to come from the private sector, driven by profit opportunities and market share opportunities, or regulation? Which is going to lead, do you think?
Regulation should lead and would need to lead for it to happen in the time frame that would be most helpful. So if we just go back to the objective of all of this, we're in a nature and climate crisis. We are really struggling to maintain a 1.5 trajectory. We need to delink from fossil fuels, the big picture stuff. And if circular economy is to be part of that, real circularity, it's got to accelerate. And we know, which goes back to what I keep saying, sending the thumbs up to the linear manufacturing system, we need something to shift. And one of the things that needs to shift is legislation. That's why I am weirdly excited about the European recycling framework thing, because once you pull out, if you think of it as being like a magic trick and you expose one part of it, that to me exposes things about real recycling points and real recycling yields. Because while we have that sort of monstrous hoax, we cannot build properly because we don't know what we're dealing with, and especially when it comes to plastics. And we are overestimating, in my opinion, the amount that plastics can figure in a truly circular system. That's one of the things that I think. Sorry, what was the question again? Oh, legislation, or what was the alternative?
Yeah, well, whether you feel it's going to be more driven by the private sector, looking for new profit and for market share opportunities, or regulation.
Yeah, I mean, because there is not, in many countries, there is not a lot of appetite for the requisite regulation. Putting that politely, we are also going to need to work with some brands and retailers. And I think it's fair to say that there is, kind of extreme innovation in some businesses, that we know that there is a profit model there. Like, I'm thinking of like businesses that I don't really know that much about, but you can think about aviation changing because of the crisis recently, when like you'll have, instead of making a profit off multiple routes and cheap flights and all the rest of it, you start to see how that might change to a sort of leasing aircraft model. We know there's things within the automotive industry that could change very quickly. Until the great diesel scandal, for example, there was just a kind of sense that you would just keep selling cars, and every year you'd bring out a slightly different model of the same vehicle. That has started to shift. And so I think with leasing and rental, all the things you talk about slowing the circle down, we are now habitual users of things from the sharing economy, like Airbnb, Uber. Like, we all know these things now. So there is going to be shift there as well. But we do need legislation, because the linear system is so compelling in a capitalist economy.
Yeah. And Rebecca, do you have any additional thoughts on that? Because certainly you have looked at it and been involved from both sides, both in terms of working on European directives and then also working for a number of organizations where it's more organization and business led. Any additional thoughts that you have?
Yeah, I'd completely agree that it needs to be led by regulation. That's by far the quickest and simplest way of enforcing mass change. Although I would also say that it needs the buy-in from businesses and brands to really get behind and communicate clearly out to citizens sort of what they're doing, how citizens should engage, and to start sort of setting more appropriate growth models, which aren't about more profit, and actually potentially stabilizing or decreasing. And that is going to be something that we need to look to the inspirational business leaders to set the path for others to follow, because a lot of the research that I found that asks consumers, citizens, sort of who's responsible, who needs to change, it's not them. They don't think it's them. They want to be told what to do, and they want the brands, retailers, and government to be able to do that. So I think that's the reality of things.
Yeah. I'd like to ask each of you the same question and just hear, slightly different perspectives. And Rebecca, if I can just stay with you, but what would be your one piece of advice for us, for the audience, about how we can build more momentum behind circular economies?
I think collaboration. So there is a lot of really, really amazing work that's going on in local communities, and a lot of opportunity to share learning, so we don't duplicate, so we don't start from square one again, and actually keep the momentum going. And CityC is a classic case of this. Like, we're now reaching out more and more to other NGOs that are saying the same message and talking to the same audience, but actually how do we talk about both campaigns at the same time so that there's that collaboration? And I think we should be less individualistic in our minds and actually look at this as a way that we can benefit everyone.
Great, thank you. Jo, can I ask you the same question? What would be your one piece of advice for us about building more momentum?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's fairly simple, but I just feel like in the case of what I've seen at Bristol Waste and the Reshop is, as much as we might not like it, convenience is so important to people. And if the choice to be more circular and do the right thing is kind of arduous and difficult and time consuming, I just feel like the kind of vast masses of people will maybe never do it. Like, obviously there's people out there who dedicate their whole lives to, a seriously zero waste lifestyle, and that is incredible. But I kind of feel it's like the middle ground, and like the general person who maybe doesn't have quite such incredible interest in this. It's those people we need to get to, and I do think convenience is essential. It's got to be easy, and certainly we've seen that. Like I said, at the Reshop, it's easy for people to bring us things, and it's easy for people to buy things as they're coming here. So they do because it's easy, not necessarily because they care about the environment particularly. So I think, convenience is important.
And in many ways, that's slightly ironic, isn't it? Because it's the convenience factor that's driving some of this waste in the first place, and we can also use it as a way of also getting people to change their behaviour. Lucy, sorry. Lucy, your piece of advice too. We've heard from Jo and Rebecca. What would be your advice on how we can build more momentum behind circular economies?
Well, I'd build on what Jo says. I think actually what you're offering is a vision of success, and I think that people are really drawn to success. They like to be on the winning side, and I think if you make your reuse facility look successful and be successful, I think people are drawn to it. And I think what the paint machine story really struck me, because you can get really quality mixed paint, and because of the technology or the system that you're using, you can get standardized paint, so you can match colors. As everything that Fired Earth or a pricey brand is offering. Like, I don't know anyone who wouldn't love that, and also love the fact that they've saved a bit of money on it. That's such a great success story. Also, it makes other people who pay through the nose for the same thing look really stupid. So that for me is where a lot of the charge is. And I think sometimes we don't have enough charge. We don't have enough sizzle in the way that we sell this. And convenience, we've all got a slightly different idea of convenience after the last few weeks. We've all been subjected to things that are very inconvenient indeed. And some of those habits will have stayed. I now have a big barrel of flour in my kitchen, which is the most annoying blooming thing ever, because I can't really get to the back door properly. But, now I have to make things from flat. Anyway, whatever, things have slightly changed. And to just go back into that, I want it now, I want this, the kind of brattishness. I'd really hope I really hope we invest in something else. So the success of other models is what I really like. The other thing that I would say in terms of overall advice is let's try and pin all our work, everything we do, to the green recovery. Let's spell it out. Let's hitch our wagon. Let's show how attached it is. Let's show about these two trajectories. We are on this way. Christiana Figueres has said it many, many times, in the last few weeks. These are, multi-billion, injections of money to reboot the economy. If they go that way, we are screwed. That's what she said, not what I'm saying. We need a green recovery, and let's show how what we're doing is absolutely pivotal to that case. Look at all the polling. People want a greener future. Everyone's done a poll, haven't they? Natural Wildlife England, all of these people have shown that there is a great desire to maintain the natural bounce back, which I think has been really oversold. But, I think that's where we have to hitch our wagon. And in terms of narratives, they're the two narratives that I think we should be invested in at the moment.
Thank you very much. If I can try and wrap up in like a minute, which is a big challenge, I'd say that there isn't one circular economy, that there's clearly lots of local circular economies where we've got individuals, communities, local businesses, councils closing the loop, reusing, repairing, remanufacturing items. And one thing that we haven't really touched upon at all is there's lots of opportunities for new jobs in all these various opportunities, and they're very local. And so there's a big opportunity when we think about the green recovery to really think about what circular economies do to that end. So, if you're listening and you're a member of a local community, there are lots of local communities doing great work in this area that you should reach out to and support if you're not doing so already. If you represent a council, consider how much more you can be doing, beyond recycling. And we just touched upon it with the example that Joe shared with us. So I'd like to thank again Lucy and Joe and Rebecca for their time and for their insights. I'd like to thank you, our audience, for joining us. Carbon Copy is about inspiring and enabling local climate action through the example of others. And so if you have low carbon initiatives that you would like to share with us, please do go ahead and do so. And I'd like to finish with a quote from Michael Schwartz. In the end, the term circularity may just be one way to make us aware that we need a more encompassing path that includes people as much as technology and nature. Thank you.